Well, the province of Alberta and its premier have put together what they call a fair deal for the province, which rethinks some of the key relationship items between the province of Alberta and the Federation of Canada. I want to welcome Preston Manning, who is the former leader of the Reform Party of Canada and was a member of the Fair Deal panel. Thank you for being with us, Preston.
Okay, thank you for having me.
So in some ways, there is little surprise because I think we saw in the last federal election a real sense of what I guess I'm going to call Western alienation, which is also in some ways not new, but felt a little heightened. When you look at the fair deal that's being offered here, what do you consider most important? What do you want Canadians to know about what the province is saying?
Well, first of all, Amanda, this panel held a lot of public meetings and hearings and received hundreds and hundreds of submissions and emails. And the number one thing that came out of that is that a large number of Albertans right across the province and right across the demographic spectrum feel that Alberta is not fairly treated within the Federation. And I think the Alberta government and I think the panel want the rest of Canada to know that that sentiment is out there and that it is quite strong. And then the challenge to the panel was to try to come, and to the people that submitted things to it, was to come up with what can you do about it. And so the panel made 13 recommendations that could actually be implemented by the Alberta government itself unilaterally without cooperation from the federal government or anybody else. And the main one there was to withdraw from the Canada Pension Plan and establish the Alberta Pension Plan, to end the contract with the RCMP and set up the Alberta Police Force, and to strengthen Alberta's representation at the bureaucratic and civil service level in Ottawa. So those were things that Alberta can do regardless of what the federal government, how it responds. And then there were 12 other recommendations, very substantive ones, but they would require cooperation from some of the other governments, in particular for equalization reform. So that's kind of the overview of the response.
I do want to hit on one that I know you consider important, and I'm sure the people of Alberta consider important, but that I think you would suggest is important to other provinces as well, and that is addressing issues where the federal government can overrule provincial jurisdiction. Just walk me through what you're talking about there and what the change would mean, not just to Alberta, but to other provinces.
Well, yes, that's a very good point, Amanda, and that's been a concern of mine right for many, many years, even before this panel. What we're suggesting is that the federal government should be prohibited from legislating, taxing, treaty making, legislating in areas of provincial jurisdiction, such as natural resources or healthcare, and joint jurisdictions, such as the environment, unless it gets the consent of the province that's affected. You could go after that through an agreement between the federal government and the provinces. Most of the provinces, I think almost all of the provinces would favor that, but you need cooperation from the federal government. If you really wanted to establish that, because it's one of the great weaknesses of the Canadian Federation, it's the cause of 50% of the discontent between provinces and the federal government. You could actually make a constitutional amendment if the federal government was agreeable.
Is it fair to say, though, and I know these are complex issues that are hard to cover in this fashion, but is it fair to say that that gets at issues that really go to the heart of who's in control, and that the federal government sometimes has to overrule some provinces because they're thinking of the interests of others or of all Canadians? Pipelines come to mind in a pro-Alberta way, frankly. But are there some issues where you just want the provinces to be able to have a veto because we do need to have some final arbiter of what's best for the whole country?
Well, I think that's true, but this proposal that we're making does not preclude the federal government from acting in areas of provincial jurisdiction or in areas of joint jurisdiction. It just has to get the consent of the province that's affected. And on issues like natural resources, and this infuriates Albertans, there is more competence in that area in Alberta and with the Alberta government than there is with the Trudeau government in its entirety. So the idea that the federal government, this federal government, has a competence superior to the provinces in the area of natural resources is simply not an acceptable proposition to a very large number of pretty competent people.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the argument would be it's less about competence and more about interest. And sometimes the interest of other parties would outweigh the interest of Albertans, which gets me to, I guess, your feelings. And this is almost, I guess, more of a political question, Preston. But when we look at, the emergence of a Wexit party, I know there have been strong voices in the West that have had discontent about the East because I grew up there for many generations. Is it a positive step for the country that we go that far, that there's a group that's dedicated to separation?
Well, it depends on how the rest of the country responds. If these fair deal demands are considered to be completely unreasonable by the rest of the country, then that's one thing, but they're not unreasonable. And all the federal government has to do is respond to some of them. It's appalling, Amanda. You people look at the global picture. I've just been reading a book called The Future is Asian. There's about 10 pages in it of infrastructure development, pipelines, railways, roads connecting countries and countries and countries all over the world. And yet we can't get infrastructure to get our interior resources to Tidewater. I heard of a case where somebody was trying to raise money for the pipeline industry, and an American investor got up and mocked the name of Trans-Canada. He said, Trans-Canada Pipelines, Trans Mountain. You Canadians can't trans anything. You can't build infrastructure across 5 provinces when the Chinese are building a silk highway across 10 countries. And we're being mocked in the rest of the world for our inability to tie things together.
We've seen obviously a decline in investment in our energy sector. Some of that's a reflection of trends away from, carbon-based investing in fossil fuels. We've only got about a minute here, but just in terms of the most important thing in this document, do you think it's on that list of things that the province can do unilaterally, or is it the 12 things that you require cooperation from other governments?
Well, the things that would have the biggest impact would be the things that require cooperation from other governments. Equalization reform, slashing the red tape that ties up the building of infrastructure, the reduction of internal barriers to trade. Those would be the big things. But if those things can't be done, there are things that Alberta can do on its own, and I'm certain that the Alberta government will do on its own. All
right, Preston Manning, it's great to have you with us. We appreciate your thoughts on this. And I'm sure that this is a subject we will continue to discuss. Preston Manning was a member of the panel, the Fair Deal panel, and of course, the former leader of the Reform Party of Canada.